Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. A couple of things before we get started. One, I need to dye my hair. I just got it cut. It looks almost brown right now. I know it's not perfectly black. Please forgive me. Second thing is that I am trying out a new mic today. This is a lapel mic. My sir had one. I'm basically using it because he insisted that I try it out and see how it works. So I'm going to be filming a video today trying it out and seeing how you guys like it. If you do like it, please let me know down in the comments if it's a good increase in quality for you. Personally, I don't really like lapel mics because it kind of affects the kind of clothes I can wear when I film, and then I have to have it plugged into the wall, and it makes me feel like I'm giving an interview in the 90s on like a daytime TV show, and I just not necessarily a big fan of the thing myself. I am saving up to actually get a like formal nice camera setup and an actual like nice shotgun microphone that would go on a hot shoe of like a DSLR. So hopefully eventually I will have something that, you know, doesn't make me feel like I'm giving an interview, but that is not the topic of today's video. Today's video is going to be about marks of ownership in BDSM, specifically things that are alternative to formal collaring collars, because there's actually a lot out there besides just collars that people can use in order to show ownership or to incorporate as part of the permanence of their DS dynamic. And I'm not just talking about anklets or bracelets or like day collars and things like that. I have a whole video talking about all of those sorts of kinds of things that I did a couple of months ago. Links down below if you haven't seen it yet. I'm going to be talking about things that are not even jewelry at all. Well, sort of not jewelry. Actually, this topic came up when I was talking to my friend Brittany. She had gotten a question, I think maybe on Tumblr or during one of her live streams, asking if piercings or scars or tattoos or anything were common in BDSM, and if people would use those like collars, like if people consider those things like collars. The answer to that is basically tattoos, piercings, any sort of alternative body modification, very common in BDSM. BDSM as a whole has a lot of overlap with a bunch of other alternative subcultures. It'd be that goth, which is actually not as common as people might think it is, at least where I live. A biker culture, gay culture, all sorts of alternative subcultures overlap with that, and almost all of those have some sort of intersection with body modification, be that tattoos, piercings, ritual scarification, all sorts of different things, getting your tongue split, all of that kind of stuff gets, you know, mixed in with BDSM all the time. It is not considered unusual at all to have body modifications of any sort in BDSM. It's not going to affect the kinds of people that will play with you. It's not going to affect your perception as a dom or a sub, although obviously it is going to depend on the nature of your body modification and what it says. Obviously, if you have a lower back tattoo that says, you know, "Sir's bitch" on it, people will probably think twice about trying to do pick-up play with you, because that is sort of a big thing. But tattoos are actually a really common and popular alternative to formal collaring collars if people want to do that instead. Some people like the feeling of tattoos. People really like the permanence of tattoos. Tattoos, obviously, unless you go to actually get them removed, if you take care of them, they will stay on your body forever. Even with something like a solid locking metal collar, there are chances and times where you may have to take it off, such as going through airport security, getting surgery, anything like that. You could have to have your collar removed, whereas a tattoo, even if you're going through surgery, even if you're going through airport security, that is going to stay with you, and it's going to be a very clear form of ownership. Now, I mentioned earlier, you know, having a lower back tattoo of "Sir's bitch." That is not necessarily something that's common, although obviously people definitely get tattoos like that. A lot of times people will actually get tattoos of their slave registry number. The slave registry is basically a online service that you can use to basically, it gives you a certificate and it gives you numbers saying that, you know, such and such person was given as a slave to such and such a master on this day. Here is the registry number. Obviously, none of that is legally binding. It's just kind of a fun thing, but a lot of people will get either like a barcode tattooed, or the date of their collaring ceremony, or their slave registry number, or something tattooed somewhere on their body. The placement is totally up to you. A lot of times people will get tattoos like this in places that are not necessarily visible when you're wearing like a normal amount of body clothing. So it might be something, you know, on the lower back, on the shoulder, back of the neck. Maybe you might get something behind the ears. You don't necessarily have to get anything like that corresponds to a slave registry number, or, you know, saying, you know, John's slave or anything like that. You don't necessarily have to get something that's really overt as a tattoo. You can do something that is just generally symbolic of your relationship. So for example, if you are in a puppy play relationship, maybe you could do like a tattoo of a pair of paws or a fire hydrant or something that is associated with your actual, you know, relationship dynamic, and that somebody looking on the outside is not going to think anything about it, but the meaning of that tattoo is the fact that you were collared and the fact that you were owned. Maybe it's a picture of a dog with a lead and a leash. You can kind of really play around with the imagery there if you want to. There's a whole variety of tattoos, and in general, tattoos are really just a form of self-expression. So if you are interested in getting a tattoo as something you would want as an alternative to a collar, obviously talk to your, you know, dom or owner about that, so you can communicate, you know, why you'd want a tattoo instead of a collaring collar or something of that effect. Maybe you live in a community where you actually have other kinky people who are tattoo artists who can do that tattoo for you and will really, you know, sort of be part of almost the ceremony with you. Another thing that is very similar to tattoos is ritual scarification. Now, I'm going to say there are two different categories of scarification. Scarification is another body modification that is done by professionals, obviously, as it should be done a lot like tattoos. It is a lot harder to find somebody who does like scarification type body modification than it is to find somebody who's a tattoo artist. You can find a tattoo artist in about any town in the world, but you can't really find somebody who is reputable who does scarification outside of major cities most of the time. Very similar idea. Scarification, however, is a lot more intense than getting a tattoo. And if you are somebody who is a sadomasochist, or that's something that really reflects the nature of your particular dynamic in your particular relationship, going through a really, really intense experience as part of your collaring ceremony, like getting something ritually scarred on your body, could be a really cool and awesome collaring ceremony. I do not have that much pain tolerance myself, but it is something that people do. Again, you can do all sorts of things with scarification. You could do the same kind of motifs I talked about with tattooing, where you get a barcode, a slave registry number. You get something that is symbolic to your individual dynamic in your relationship. A lot of times also with scarification, people will go more, I don't necessarily want to say tribal, but they go a bit more abstract with the designs. They get things like lotus flowers, they get tribal designs, they get Celtic knotwork, they get a lot of different things that, you know, scar over time and create different patterns and shapes. It's a little bit easier, at least in my understanding of it, to do something that is a pattern rather than trying to carve out something more complicated, like let's say a silhouette of a dog or something like that. But it is totally up to you. Obviously, if you're interested in scarification, please do look up a reputable artist for that. Now, as an alternative to that, if you don't necessarily want to go full on body mod scarification type of thing, you can actually do scalpel play, blood play type of stuff that can scar purposely as a permanent mark. Now, I have sort of a personal story with this. I won't really go into the details, but on one of my legs, I have 4 parallel marks from a scalpel that went very deep into my leg, and because of the position they are at on my leg, they will likely not be completely permanent, but they will stay for a very, very long amount of time. They will eventually fade over time. The difference between these two is if you are already in a relationship where you participate in this kind of edge play, where you do stuff with scalpels, you do stuff with blood play, etc., and you know how to use those tools and you know the way to do it, and you've been to the classes to do it, you can have your dominant actually do the mark for you somewhere on your body. The aftercare obviously is going to be a little bit different. If you do want the scar to stay and actually become a permanent mark, the kind of aftercare you're going to get, and not necessarily like the after scene care, but literally the aftercare for the wounds that you have created, is going to be different than if you actually wanted to encourage healing, because when you're doing something like scarification, you're trying to create scar tissue and actually prevent the skin from completely healing the way that it normally would or should. Obviously, that is definitely going to be a bit more of an extreme route. It's going to take a lot more preparation, obviously, and because it's not done by somebody who is not because it's done by somebody who's not necessarily a professional at scarification, please do keep the designs simple unless you've done a lot of play with your partner like this before. But the advantage is, of course, you're doing it with your partner, so that adds a layer of intimacy and trust and depth to the actual, you know, ceremony itself that you are doing. And again, you can get any sort of designs or numbers or words or whatever that you want to have done. The last two things that I'm going to be talking about, which aren't necessarily really related to each other, are going to be branding and then piercings. So branding is, so I guess when people think about it, they think about like somebody heating up like a hot iron poker and then like sticking it in somebody's skin, you know, like a piece of cattle. And I know that's a fantasy for a lot of people. I do not personally know a lot about this kind of branding. There's a lot of kinds of branding out there, be that ice branding, cell popping, etc. Things like cell popping and ice branding are temporary. They're not actually going to be permanent marks if that is something that you want, if you want this as sort of a permanent color alternative. I do know of people who have had brands done. I don't know enough about the process to really talk about it in this video at any length, but branding is another thing you can do in addition to scarring or tattoos as an alternative to actually wearing a collar. Piercings are also a really big thing to do, and again, kind of like scarification, there are sort of two routes here. There's the professional route you can go to any piercing artist, obviously, unless you're getting a complicated genital piercing, something like a Prince Albert or, you know, any kind of female genital piercing. Make sure you do your research, go to somebody who is actually known to do these piercings frequently, because you do not want to end up with a rejected piercing if it's going to be something that is meant to be permanent, obviously. So you can do piercing the professional route and just go to any piercer and then just have the piercing, you know, the location of it, the type of jewelry that you pick out, etc., be symbolic for you individually as a couple, as like a permanent mark, is like, this is like a permanent mark of my ownership over you that you have this piercing in this particular location. Maybe they have a certain kind of color that is associated with your partner. So for me, my partner's color is red. So if we did something like a body piercing, very likely we would either get something that was anodized to a red color, or we would do something that had like a red gemstone or something in it, because that is his color. So it really directly connects the piercing to my partner, and it's sort of a reminder that way. Again, there is also the route where you can have your partner do the piercing for you. Obviously, don't do this if you don't have any experience with piercing. This route is a lot riskier. It's probably better sort of kind of get between the two roads and find a kink-friendly piercer or somebody in your community who is a professional piercer who can do it for you and understands your lifestyle and your choices and all that. But if you have experience with piercing, you've done a lot of needle play, your partner's done a lot of needle play, and you have, you know, done some kind of apprenticeship with it, I'm not at all recommending that you get your partner to do the piercing, but it is something that people do. In that case, I would definitely recommend doing a simple piercing, like an ear piercing or something, just because, you know, higher risk, don't want anybody to get hurt. But there are a ton of alternatives to just having a locking metal collar or some kind of locking collar if you do not want one. Now, should they actually be called collars? That is the interesting part. To me, no, I wouldn't call them collars. Like, I wouldn't consider having a body piercing that's symbolic of my being owned by somebody else to be a collar. I wouldn't call, unless it was something that was directly around my neck somewhere, it's not really a collar. I don't even call the anklet that's on my ankle, even though it's permanent and locking, a collar. It's symbolic in sort of the same way as a collar would be, but it's still not a collar, factually speaking. I think a better term would be a mark of ownership, because that is basically the purpose that a collar has in this sense. If you're going through a collaring ceremony, that is what it means. And so in the same vein, all of these things can also be considered marks of ownership. Now, obviously, do take in mind, unless you are wearing a like 2-inch thick piece of leather or metal around your neck that's locking and again says like John's bitch on it or whatever, very likely that people are going to approach you and not realize you are owned. It used to be, many years ago in the community, collars had a lot of set meanings to them. If you saw somebody wearing a collar, you basically knew that they were owned or that they had a dominant of some kind, and that changed the interaction. But this day and age, things are not as common, and especially if you have a piercing or a tattoo or a scar or whatever that is covered by your clothing, people aren't going to see it, and to them, maybe you look like a dom, or you look like an unowned submissive, or you look like a switch or whatever, even if you're totally not at all. So keep in mind, people may approach you and not necessarily realize that you're owned. Don't be offended, If they approach you respectfully explain back to them that you're owned, you're not interested in playing with them. You certainly don't have to answer any questions, be that from vanilla people or kinky people, about the symbolism behind your various jewelry, scars, tattoos, or whatever. If you want to, that is totally okay, but you are under no obligation at any point to explain any body modification or any color that you wear to anyone. It's your own personal thing. So yeah, that's basically all I wanted to cover in this video. Hopefully you found it interesting, helpful, something. You got something out of this video. I'm not going to tell you what that is. You get to make that decision for yourself. But if you did like it, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, stories, video suggestions, etc., please feel free to leave that down below. All of my social media, links to things I talked about in this video, all that's going to be down in the description box, as well as a link to my Patreon. It really, really does help this channel, and part of the reason why I'm able to make upgrades with my equipment and improve stuff on my channel is through that Patreon account. I'm going to be getting some channel art next with my Patreon stuff, which is so awesome, and I'm so excited. And basically, I've been saving up that money so I can get new camera equipment. So if you want to support that, please go to that link. I have a ton of different great perks and benefits if you want to support me on Patreon. But that is everything for today. And until I see you next time, have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.